What's up, Scyushi Squad? We are back in some more Trove Lunar, and today we're going to be talking about the Lunar Lancer. How are you going to end up building the class, so on and so forth. I've been running through all of these tutorials over the past couple days. I know you're probably tired of them, but keep in mind that these videos are going up because I have them all pre-recorded so that I can put them up to you guys and have consistent content over the next following days. Because I'm getting married and busy with stuff. I just wanted to put out a quick reminder of that. So obviously if you're watching this in the future, that doesn't really matter anymore. But anyways, Lunar Lancer is one of those characters that is a powerhouse. So those of you that don't know, Lunar Lancer did end up getting a rework quite some time ago and ends up being one of the faster speed farming classes in the game. Keeps right on up there with Neon Ninja and so on and so forth. Neon Ninja is obviously still going to end up being much faster, but Lunar Lancer is just a treat. It's just so fun to play. Unfortunately, a lot of the abilities are not going to end up being super duper ideal for your speed farming and so on and so forth, but the class has a very high base movement speed, not represented in the speed that you're seeing me use right here because I don't have all of my gear set up on this character. But the grappling hook is really useful for endgame dungeons because endgame dungeons are quite vertical. So you can, well, our club world is broken. That's why the grappling hook is not working. Anyways, there you go. So you can end up grappling up like a lot of blocks, and it's very useful. There's not much of a cooldown, so you can use it very effectively to get around if it actually works properly, but half the time it just doesn't because that's just how our club world is. It's very busted. Number one ability again is going to be useful for that verticality just because it'll leap you up in the air. I mean, you guys know how the Lunar Lancer works generally speaking. The ultimate ability is going to end up being big boy damage, but basically you're just going to be using your base attack for the majority of your damage, and then your class gem ability is going to end up helping with that. Now anyways, let's get into it. So what subclass ability are you going to use? Obviously you can't use Sorta Crazy, and you don't really want to be using Mounted Cavalry. You can if you want to, but your movement speed is going to end up being higher just without a mount, so it doesn't really matter. And because Lunar Lancer has such extreme levels of verticality, it means that you more than likely don't need to use Volatile Bounder, which is one of the endgame mounts that basically boosts you up into the air. So it's actually a very tough call between a couple different options here. So I'd say your best bet is probably just going to be a Solarian subclass ability, just because the light value, obviously the basic attack, you know, damage over time effect is going to be quite useful as well. But generally speaking, that's going to end up being very useful. You could use the Gunslinger just because of the extra jump value, but again, you're not really going to need it. Same with the Bard. You could use that just for the extra crit damage. Maybe you want flying speed of the Fae, not to mention the Sparkle Grenade is actually not that bad. The Sugar Rush is actually a pretty decent one just because it'll end up giving you more attack speed and more movement speed and so on and so forth. And again, the Tomb Raiser is going to end up being a pretty decent one just because you'll end up having more allies. But again, the best option is probably just going to be the Phoenix Fire of the Solarian, just because I don't know why you would end up using anything else. Now, as far as all of your gear is concerned, ignoring the stats that I have on all of this stuff, you're going to be focusing on movement speed and attack speed, because attack speed is going to be where all of your damage comes from because of your basic attack, and then the movement speed is just because of the fact that this class is just so speedy. Then there's going to end up being the hidden ring effect of the crystal ring, so I'll go through all of these abilities with you guys very briefly. So from the moon, when in lunar form, basic attacks have a chance to spawn meteors from the sky. I can attest to that being a pretty crappy ability because generally speaking, when you're in lunar mode, everything's gonna die anyway, usually faster than the meteors can end up coming down in my experience. But next is going to be Cliffhanger. Dodging lowers the cooldown of the grapple and empowered grapple. This ability has a short cooldown, so the hidden ring effect itself has an internal cooldown, which does kind of suck. However, that is going to end up being pretty good. I mean, for the most part, like, the cooldown on the grappling hook is not really bad. When the grappling hook can work, see, it's only like a few seconds, so it's not that big of a deal, and you can use your number one to give you the slow fall effect to kind of compensate, and then you could end up using your empowered grappling hook anyways. However, you know, that is going to end up being pretty decent. However, more than likely you'll be going for need for speed. So after using the buffed grapple, you'll gain a speed buff instead of attack. So instead of your attack buff, which is, in my opinion, that's going to be the best hidden ring effect, just because you're basically going to end up jumping up in the air with your number 1 and then using your empowered grapple. Our club world is broken, but you would end up using your empowered grapple, and then you would end up having more movement speed, and you can go insanely fast. I already have other videos that covered that in the past, and I mean, it's just absolutely beautiful how quickly this character can end up going, like, sincerely. So then there's going to end up being the banner, which generally speaking, the nitro one is probably your best bet, just because getting extra nitro is going to be good money. Otherwise, if you are looking for the most optimal, that's going to end up being the Leviathan torches. So there's the daily torches that expire, the weekly torches, which are combining the daily torches, and those expire. And then there's going to be the ultra super mega rare permatorch, which is short for permanent torch, which is because it's a torch that never expires. So you can end up getting that very rarely from Leviathans. There's also a badge that you can get for completing 250 Leviathans. Will give you a permanent torch, and that's the best torch in the game. The ally, of course, you're going to have a couple different options, but your best option is going to end up being the Delves allies or Ernie. So the Delve animated jug is going to give you the movement speed, which again, that is what we are primarily focusing on with the Lunar Lancer. You could use Jingles. Actually, no, you don't want to use Jingles because you don't really need the cooldown reduction on this guy that much. You could use Ernie just because of the extra damage that you get because of the light value, because Lunar Lancer can actually deal a significant amount of damage despite the fact that you wouldn't think so. And then Raptor Berserker is going to be if you don't have any of those Delve allies. And then there's going to end up being the emblems themselves. So these will vary. The reason I'm using Unyielding and Trailblazing is because the last time I used Lunar Lancer, you know, we were just dealing with U10 enemies rather than the U11 enemies that are in the game right now, which means that I would more than likely have to swap out Unyielding for Martial Emblem just because of the sheer damage. Trailblazing is a must just because the movement speed, and then otherwise, if you are early on in the game, you could end up using Sure Strike just because it's going to give you that extra bit of crit hit that you may or may not need. For your flask capacity, I'd recommend more so than ever Death Defying. The Lunar Lancer is very, very speedy and actually has a pretty significant amount of damage. However, the class is very, very squishy. So Death Defying is just going to end up being one of your best bets. If you really want to take the risk-reward ratio, you could end up using Conjurers just because it triggers on Magic Find and it'll give you more flask for the long run. But yeah, I mean, there are plenty of other different flask options, but generally speaking, Death Defying is just kind of the standard that everybody ends up using. Now, before we end up talking about the class gem abilities and class gem stats and so on and so forth, I'm going to briefly mention the stats that you're going to be focusing on for mid-game, and then you just increase those numbers accordingly as you get further and further along in the game. So your physical damage, you're going to want to try and have at the minimum your base value at 80,000, just because, you know, the way that that scales is very, very nice. Your crit hit base value, again, 50%. Anything higher than that's going to be great. You're aiming for 100%, okay? You're aiming for like 70 to 80%, so you can just use Sure Strike to compensate, and then obviously anything higher than that is going to be very, very nice. And then your crit damage is aiming for 800% and up. These are very, very low ball numbers, just to let you guys know, okay, this is where you're starting. Okay, you know, I know that a lot of you might be watching and just be like, my stats are so far away from there, but it's very, very easy to achieve those stat values. The tricky part is getting higher than that. So, of course, we're going to end up talking about the gem stats themselves, but is the class gem ability going to end up being useful on the Lunar Lancer? Yes, most definitely. Basic attacks have a chance to spawn a dark shadow version of yourself that attacks enemies, and in lunar form, the chance is increased. So this gem effect used to be bad. It's still very random whether it spawns allies, but at the very least, the allies will do significant amount of damage. So it's definitely worth getting this. And frankly speaking, class gems are the easiest crystal gem you can obtain. they're not easy, they're just the easiest. So keep that in mind. And then otherwise, I'm going to swap to my Shadow Hunter because it's the only class that I have fully maxed out crystal gems on that is set up for a physical build. So keep in mind that the only difference between my gems and your gems is that your stats might be significantly lower whether you're using stellar or radiant gems, but generally speaking, the way that you build these is going to end up being the exact same. So for your empowered cosmic gem, that's going to end up being either Berserk Battler if you want the extra damage. However, I would recommend using Vampirium on the Lunar Lancer because it's going to give you lifesteal, which gives a lot more survivability to the Lancer, but more specifically, it will also give you a movement speed boost. And again, the primary goal of the Lancer is movement speed. Not to imply that you can't end up using it in Delves. You're not really going to use Lunar Lancer on a Leviathan, but you can if you must. Generally speaking, though, it's all about the movement speed. It's all about the speed. Now, as far as all of your cosmic gems are concerned, the stats that you're aiming for with these bad boys is you're going to get 3 pearls into light, and then you're going to try and augment that stat like as a priority, because of course these cosmic gems can be traded amongst your other physical damage classes, and having a higher light value is basically a higher armor penetration value for the end game enemies, and it is required. Like, the higher the light, the better. And then the other substats on the cosmic gems are going to be physical damage and crit damage, you know, pretty standard. Pyrodisc is an absolute must of your other empowered gems, and then of course the class gem ability itself. And then if you want survivability, cubic curtain, but beggars can't really be choosers with the empowered gems that you end up getting in the specific elemental slots, right? Just, you know, that's all there is to it. There are a couple different other options, but generally Pyrodisc is the only mandatory one. All of your empowered gems, I'd suggest, is 2 pearls physical damage, 1 pearl crit damage, no pearls crit hit. In the unlikely chance, or not unlikely, but I'm just saying, if you're watching this video, in the chance that you end up getting to the end game and you have 100% crit hit and have over 100% crit hit, you can start cycling some of your gem stats to max health instead of crit hit, but you always want to end up having those damage stats available to you. Now, for your lesser gems, the easiest way that I can explain this in a way for you guys to digest is a 3x3 ratio. So 3 of these lesser gems are going to be the exact same stats as your empowered. So 2 pearls physical damage, 1 pearl crit damage, no pearls crit hit. And then the other 3, because there's a total of 6, is going to end up being 2 pearls crit damage, 1 pearl physical damage, no pearls crit hit. Now, if any of those pearls end up fluctuating between more crit hit ratio, more physical damage ratio, it doesn't really matter that much. You know, with the Lunar Lancer especially, like, you're going to be able to handle pretty much anything in Prime Uber Worlds anyways, and it's all just about that movement speed. You know, you might end up having slightly more damage by changing up where the pearls are. You know, it's just kind of a rule of thumb. Aim for this and try to end up having a nice balance between them all, instead of just going too hard in one direction. It could end up being where you're suffering. But when you start getting to this super end game setup, it really doesn't make as much of a difference as you would think. And yeah, that's pretty much going to cover it. So hopefully I covered everything. If I missed anything in terms of the, you know, the Lunar Lancer build and stuff, you can sound off in the comments below. I'll try to catch the comment, and if I do, I'll pin it if it's you know, something that I think is significant enough. But otherwise, that's going to do it for today. Smash like, sub for more, buy the merch you want to support the channel, and have a wonderful day, everybody.